Sex at the camp. Holy shit! It all changed with the benders. When the English women brought over and taught us how to build benders, then like everybody had their own little, sex hut. Nobody had to share tents anymore. I think it opened up Moan Alley. Amazon Acres was never quite the same again. There is something that the women at Greenham Common taught us how to build, and you take saplings and you bend them. You make little holes in the ground or large holes because you really have to set them in. And you set in one end of the sapling, and then you bend it, and you set it in on the other side, and then you just keep doing that, tie them together, and then cover the whole thing with whatever plastic you have at hand, or canvas, but canvas gets wet, plastic doesn't. So some people did canvas in some spots and left little windows open, so that when they covered the whole thing in plastic, they had more privacy with just some little windows, and they are quite unique. There's a picture of them, I think, on the blog, right? And of course, I had to build one that I could stand up in because they were used to building these little gnome things. I was like, oh no. So I built the larger, because at one point, I guess it was still in the summer. I don't know if I wasn't really renting Scheherazade out, but I just wasn't really in it that much. I think it was probably because I couldn't stand up in it. So I made my own bender. And you use the trees. It was like building forts. It was great. You could have some trees be a little foyer. Or remember, if you save a couple this way, you had a little walkway into it. And there was your bedroom on this side and your sitting room on the other. They were quite involved. But they were great to look out over. And you'd see these little glistening gnome huts in the woods. Well, sex, now that I brought it up, why did I? I was, believe it or not, I was probably the world's largest baby dyke at the time. So I had come out of Geneva and, the softball dyke scene, and I had still been with the man that was battering me, but I was able to get away from that. So when I got to the peace camp and it was just women only space, then it was really kind of like, you had the freedom to do nothing, or you had the freedom to do whatever you wanted if you found somebody else who wanted to do whatever you wanted with you. And there was no shortage of that. But I think I still was pretty conservative. I wasn't exactly a rabid kind of, oh, do me girl. But there were a few women, and it was a little strange because I hadn't come across any S&M. I didn't know what S&M was. Although, a battering relationship might be fucking S&M. So maybe I was already in it, but, I didn't know that it existed in the lesbian community. And I had a little run-in with that, but it was like, no thank you. Not what I liked. Not what I wanted. So that was, it was a little strange to have all these different, things going on, because it wasn't just the lesbians. You also had the family. What did we call the family acres? There was the Amazon Acres that was women-only space. And then on the flip side of that was, the family acreage.
Right,
where women and children could camp. And I don't know, what was it?
Briar Patch.
Briar Patch. Oh, that's right. I didn't ever hear complaints from Briar Patch, did they? I mean, did things get out of control in Amazon Acres to the point where women were like, keep it down over there? I don't know if that happened. And I don't know that we really sat around in circles and talked about sex or anything. I don't think there were meetings about sex, thank the fucking Lord. But there sure was plenty going on. Girlfriends breaking up and making up and, all this, what is it called? Intrigue going on. So, on top of everything else that was going on, it just made for the complete experience. The public didn't like, the lesbian public displays of affection. And then women started thinking that it was antithetical to what we were doing, and we weren't there to bring attention to lesbianism. We were there to bring attention to peace and justice. And so it did get into I don't know if I, was in that particular meeting, though, because you could choose about 25 a day if you wanted to. I don't know that I got into that one, because I was brought up in a family where you really didn't do public displays of affection. Maybe a hug or a peck on the cheek, but I don't remember seeing my parents naked in public, but I don't necessarily know that I saw any lesbians necking in public either at the camp. Women holding hands, greeting each other, but somehow there were people that were like, you shouldn't be doing that. And I was like, and I remember the arguments that, being able to have sexual freedom was just the same as peace and justice. How can you have the one without the other, and what is the oppression all about, and how many levels, how deep does the oppression go? What are the levels? And if we start oppressing each other, then how is that we're mirroring? And there was this odd dynamic, I think, even in the stratification of the women and their sexualities. And I think, I don't know, if we talked about this before, the gold medal dykes and the baby dykes, like I was a baby dyke just coming out even, and that was like a joke. I remember Cataquinta just thought it was the funniest thing that I was the largest baby dyke she'd ever seen. I was proud to introduce me. This is my new baby dyke friend. And people were like, yeah, all right. So, but there was, this kind of holier than thou. The women had been lesbians all along, and they'd never sucked dick, and they never would, and they were like, gold medal lesbians, and none of us ever quite measured up to that stratosphere, and it was strange, being there as brand new to any of that, only the softball dykes. Well, if you live in a small town of the Finger Lakes, you're not walking around town, after softball going, yeah, dykes, man! That wasn't that. You get the shit kicked out of you. So to go from, quiet, all backwoods, hush-hush, to women being so kind of out there was, that was shocking to me. Kind of like, whoa. I didn't take my shirt off. I remember, forget about it, go naked. No, that wasn't happening. But I didn't really feel very nice to, have that kind of, that felt antithetical to what was going on. It was kind of like, how can you be, creating these like layers of who's better than the other because, they've been licking longer. It was kind of like, oh, I get it. Not. So. But anyway, that was just another kind of, spice in the cupboard at the camp. It was those little debates and tensions, and even amongst the organizers, because there was, the woman who, what did I say she was? The woman who smelled like her name, or and it was just too much to, to have this. I'm feeling bad. I shouldn't. Thank God we're not using names. But, how can you be put to be doing peace and justice work and be putting down, your own women who are busting their ass, getting sunburned and covered with poison ivy, and handling the garbage and the water, and, splinters galore, 1,200 feet of accessible, walk. That was shit, it was like a lot of work, and to then be put down because, we hadn't found women like they did, right off the bat. So that was a little strange, but, never to be deterred. That was a winter action. I think was that in between when we got arrested and when we got sentenced? Might have been, because, they didn't sentence us right away. I think they weren't quite sure what to do with us after we did that action in town. And I think we just kind of went for it. And it was winter time and cold and nothing else to do. And, if you stay in a house too long, you get involved in another debate. You can only debate so many subjects with the same 5 women, or however many there were, People are coming by, stopping by, and there's always some roaring debate going on with just whoever's remaining there. So we got kind of tired of it. And we took our bolt cutters and we went to the back fence. And we took twine and soaked it in paraffin. And we tied, they had regular posts where the fence was. And what I thought was kind of silly, in hindsight, they had the posts on the inside of the fence, right? They had the posts on the inside and the fence attached to the outside. So for us, What we're looking at is fence with post. So it's very easy to cut those. So we would tie the paraffin things up to the post and then cut right there. And we did that for about a mile. And just very slowly, and as the patrols came by, we'd dive back into the bushes and come back out. And of course, we were trying to pretend like we were hiding our footprints. Well, what other footprints are there? Or a scratchy, twig, whatever we were doing, dragging a branch behind us, And there's nothing by the fence, of course, because they keep it all clear so they can see it. But they didn't notice that there were branch scratches hiding footprints. That didn't make any sense. But we did it all at night. Until finally one night we had, I guess, enough cut down. We were satisfied enough. And then we lit torches and ran along and hit the, all the little ties that we had made. And too bad we didn't have a film camera for that. It was glorious. Because you just see this whole stretch, and then you just hear this, and the whole section just came down. Just the whole section. And of course they flipped. They thought it was witchcraft, they thought it was whatever. And I'm sure later they, some genius must have found the burnt paraffin and smelt it or been able to figure it out. But at the time they didn't even approach the fence. It was just kind of like, on the walkie-talkies with, oh, yeah. You didn't really hear what they were saying, but the level of their voices was kind of, who the fuck? That kind of stuff. What do we do now? Well, how much did they cut? Miles! That was successful. It was fun to mess with them. Because again, the point was, we didn't cross the fence then. The point was they had no security. And we were just like, kids having a lark. We were, I was straight out of college. So I love that quote from Karen Beadle when she said, what a wonderful thing to be involved with when you were 20 years old. I think I was 23, It was like, it was great. And then we also had another action. There was a couple of us. My father had a really wonderful recurve bow made for him. And he's, the Samoan man, 6'6", 280. So he taught us, all us kids, how to use the bow. And it was for practice. And there's this whole, zen of it where, you pick it up. It's one with you. And, it's all one motion, how you pick it up and how you shoot it. And it's all supposed to be one solid motion. So as kids, we would practice with it. Well, I brought my father's bow out to the camp with the quiver and the Rosendahl and the wrist guard. And one time we got a ride down into New York City. We went to Chinatown. And they had all these illegal fireworks in some dingy basement. And we were like, oh yeah, paying for nice thin long fireworks. And went back up to the camp and I'd strap them to the arrows. And we hopped the first fence and got to the second fence. And there was, the way the fences were, that sometimes the Q zone and the second fence were closer to each other than at other points, so it was kind of elliptical somehow. And I strapped the fireworks to the arrows and shoot them out over the Q zone and watch them lose their minds. And just shoot a couple and then run, because by the time you shoot them, they're already lit, right? So they're already going, so you have time to run before they go off, so that if they're trying to figure out the trajectory of where they're coming from, they can't tell. And of course, it was always nighttime. So it was just, it was a lark. It was fun to mess with these guys who thought that they were God's gift to security when it was a joke. Well, it wasn't exactly an action, but it was along that same time when after the Waterloo 54, and we started getting, really a lot of pressure from the townspeople, and the fire bombings were happening on the land, and the hunting arrow, and right by the propane tanks, and the hunting arrows are those razor, three-sided, really wackadoo things. I don't know if they could have actually punctured that propane tank, but who wanted to find out? And what a weird thing, because at the house, little kids were running back and forth, and and it happened at night because we found it in the morning. It was heavy at the camp, and the local kids used to ride there. There was an abandoned railroad track that kind of sliced the land in almost half, more towards the back, but there was an abandoned railroad track that went right across the land, and it was built up and everything. And the local kids used to race it on their motorcycles and on their all-terrain vehicles. Those four-wheel drivey things. I guess that's what they are. And it would just get stupid though because we had too many kids. You know, it cut across between the fields where Amazon Acres and Briar Patch were in the back, and then there was the railroad tracks, and then there was the rest of the land. And people were always crossing those because they had to get back to where they were camping. And one night I just had enough. Because I was sick of getting buzzed by these kids. And they were probably the same kids that had been throwing those fire bombs. There was only a couple of them that I knew of. But still, how many do you need to get creeped out? And I had on this big, long, black kind of cape that my mother-in-law at the time had made me. And the inside was like red and black checked. And the outside was just solid black. And I used to wear that at night when it got chilly because, believe it or not, even though we were in the drought, it would still drop down. And I had a big belt cinched across it. And I saw the kids coming on the land over closer to Romulus. They weren't quite on our property yet, but we knew where they were coming. I just had enough. And I had this great big walking stick that I used to, walk around the property with sometimes. I was like, I've had enough. And I just took off. I knew they were coming at the diagonal. So I just took off to catch them at the far corner so I could intersect with them. And I just popped out onto the railroad tracks and took my, with my stick. And I was running. And I get to the railroad tracks, hop up and just take the stick and go, wah! And sure enough, here they come. Blah, blah! I knocked them off their bikes. I was like, and don't do it again! Don't you know there's witches here? And they were like, ooh. They didn't buzz us anymore. I don't think they got hurt, but I wasn't really paying attention if they did or not because I didn't care at the time because they could have hurt somebody.
When you arrived at the land, were you Kim or Samoa?
I was Kim.
How did that happen?
Samoa, that might have been something to do with Katakununta, I think. And women were renaming themselves daily. You had to kind of check in to find out if their name was still the same today that it was yesterday, because everybody was just changing up names, and that's what's made it a little hard to try to find everybody now, because some of the names, I don't know what their real names were, because there's River Bend, and I just had never heard some of these names before, and I think I don't know how it came about really, but maybe it was through telling our stories of who our parents were, and my father's Samoan and my mother's French and Irish, so they started calling me Mama Samoa, and somehow the mama dropped, and then it just became Samoa. So I don't even know who started, to tell you the truth, but it really got cemented when we did that second full moon mud wrestling. And that was our own action kind of against the hierarchy of the camp. Because, I'm sure people really remember the meetings because there were so many of them. But at some point, it just got too much. It was like, we have work to do, and maintaining the place was a lot of work. And when you're a physical worker, you have daylight to do your physical work, and I was like, can we have these meetings at night? No, it had to be right away. And I just was like, I'm boycotting. I'll meet with the people I need to meet with just to do my job. And that's all. I'm enough of all this other. I couldn't handle it. So I called my work crew together. And we went back into Amazon Acres. And I had them start digging. And we all started digging a 30-foot by 30-foot mud pit. It was huge. And remember, this is drought. This is clay on top of shale. That's the kind of soil we had there. Because every time we popped through it, you get clay, and then you get a line of rock, shale that you had to pop through. And it was incredible stupid work. And instead of all the meetings, we just, and we made up a song, a meeting, and it went to the beat of, the Maddoxes. Again, the Maddox, you can do anything you want with the Maddox, I swear. And it was like, a meeting, we're on our way to a meeting, a meeting, a meeting. We're on our way to a meeting. I have one later tonight. I had one early today. A meeting. We're on our way to a meeting. And we're like, people are like, what are you doing? Digging! And we wouldn't tell anyone. So then we made an announcement and put up flyers all over the place that the second full moon in August, we were going to have female mud wrestling. No photos were allowed, and no press was allowed. And it was back in Amazon Acres. So we put flyers all over the camp, invited everybody, and then I ran off into town in my trusty little, my big old truck, and we went and got material to make these little costumes. And it was a tag team match. It was Pebbles, Bam Bam, and Killer Quiche, because no real man would ever eat her, versus Slav and Samoa, because my partner was of Slavic origin and I was Samoan, right? So it was Samoa and Slav versus Pebbles, Bam Bam, and Killer Quiche. So 3 against 2. Well, when we went and got the material, we got them just enough to wear, little things to cover their crotches. We got them just barely enough material to make like little bikinis or something out of, where we got ourselves, these red sequiny looking capes. It was just all nylon or whatever it was, but it looked like we had these red sequin capes, and we had tops that we made of fake leopard or something, made our bottoms out of fake leopard, and we had attendants who were holding our capes as we came walking out. The place was nuts that night, and it created so much noise that the base sent out special warnings, because they couldn't figure out what in the hell was going on over there. Because women, when they were waiting for us, because, we had this big production and made them wait for us, and they announced us, and the place was just like, thrumming, roo, 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 just this primal, roo, roo. And the base was like all over the place. What the fuck's going on? Sending extra security, because they thought we were mounting an offensive from the back fence. And they were panicked to death. And I think Bird was still on the other side. So she was the one that was telling us, what a panic it sent them into, because they thought they were going to get attacked by us or something, not knowing what was really going on. Female mud wrestling, we should have charged in hindsight. But anyway, we get out there, and the rules were set. We had a referee. Sita Lang was our referee, and we bought her some very nice material to wear too. So, and she was, the Amazon that everyone coveted, right? She was the woman that that rode her bicycle from Minnesota. So, do you remember Sita? Sita?
Yeah.
Yeah, she and Jane Eyre had hooked up. So anyway. So she's the referee, and we wanted her on our team, but her knees are bad, and she didn't want to mess them up, because she knew we were going to, get stupid. And the crowd had to judge after a certain amount of time who the winners were by who had the least amount of mud on them. And it was wild, it was like picking up women and throwing them, and 2 of them on me and throwing them off. And turns out Slav is Jennifer Miller, who went on to do Circus Amok. Right? So she was already an acrobat. So she'd get on my shoulders and do flips off. And, we had this whole thing. I'd put my leg up like this, and she'd run and hop and flip and then land on somebody. It was great. It was like World Wrestling Federation at its best, And the crowd was nuts. There were mothers, there were children, there were grandmothers, and I still have women coming up to me this day that were like, "Weren't you the..." I'm like, but yeah, I have no idea who they are. And our team won. Slav and Samoa won, because when all was said and done, when we all had to spin around and be expected, my big old ethnic butt was, about as big as the moon, just another white patch. And it was, the only white spot left on any of us. So, but it was nuts, because, even with all that chopping and trying to get it really fine so none of us would get hurt and stuff, the first one to go down was Killer Quiche, because Slav just grabbed her by the ankles and went, whoop, just popped her ankles up, and she just went like a tree, bang! And when she came up, oh shit, she was missing a piece of her nose. She was just, it's not very funny now, but, not a big piece, but a chink anyway. She just came up looking for blood, and she was like, "Oh, we're playing this for real, are we?" And she tried to get really intense. And Killer Quiche is now, do I tell him Killer Quiche is? She's now She's now assistant attorney general or is it deputy attorney general, whatever the second attorney general is of the state of West Virginia. That would have been D.L. Hamilton. And I can't remember who Pebbles and Bam Bam were, unfortunately. That's like really sad. But, to this day, I've had people walk up to me in Provincetown, I had my mother at the camp that weekend. They tell me these stories of their mothers who were so appalled at the thought of, what are they doing? And then sure enough, they bring them to the mud wrestling, and the moms were like all rabid, just as bad as everybody else. And when we came out, it was such theater because we had the capes, we had our followers, and we took our capes off really nicely and handed them to them, and it was all this thing. And then, just when we were about to face down to everybody, we were all like, roar, and then we took our tops and just ripped them off us. We were like, rah! And that was set the tone. Oh, that was one of the highlights. That, and I think taking over the air traffic control tower for me. It was like, women can do anything.
Had you been a witch before you came to the camp?
I never thought I was. But then, starting to learn from the other women and realize that, when I started looking back at my life, I was like, oh, that's why that happened. Oh, that's, things started kind of making sense. And when I first encountered the magic at Seneca, I got quite ill. I wasn't prepared for it. And I remember it was, somebody at the base had told us that there was an underground network of tunnels. And we decided to try to find them. And these tunnels stretched beyond the borders of the base. So they, it wasn't just because the base is not just what was above ground, obviously. And the Q zone was not just something that was above ground. And, we had heard rumors of these, and people inside the base said that they knew people that did maintenance, and so we decided to try to map them out. And we were told that some of the tunnels did indeed run under the land. So I had learned how to dowse for water. And, it was by holding 2 copper cylinders and then had these kind of L-shaped metal pieces. So I would have 2 copper cylinders and then an L-shaped piece, the littlest piece here and then the longer piece sticking out. So then you have these 2 kind of pointers. And if they cross, then that marks a spot. And if they're open, then you're still looking. And it was the same way that I have been trained to find water. That was only instead of using the copper and the metal, you would use a fruit tree branch, and usually it was one, and you hold on to the 2 pieces, and then the one would dip where the water was. And I always knew that something was going on with my mother and her mother. Because there were, my grandmother was this really strong, her Irish French-Canadian woman. Her father was Irish right off the boat, and her mother was French-Canadian. And both those women have always been psychic. My mother always knew when I was in trouble. She always knew when something was going on, and she just always had this sixth sense of what was happening. And sure enough, the night that she stayed up crying or whatever, I'd call the next day and tell her that I was okay, because I knew that she would know if something was happening with me. So there was always that kind of, wondering what was going on with my mom and my grandmother. And they could kind of predict things. And, just some people might pass it off, but the Irish full well know that there's witches. And they, use them for midwifery and for healing and my grandmother and my mother knew the herbs, my grandmother especially, and about nutrition and, growing her own food and, all that stuff that people don't associate with witchcraft. But, it is. So when I got to the peace camp and I saw these women who were proclaiming themselves witches rather than be repelled, I was like, what? Here's women that are calling themselves. Let's find out what's this about. Because I, too, like my mother and my grandmother, had that ability to sense things, and usually it was like premonitions, or the skin would crawl, or my body would give me signals of if something was great or if something was lousy. If something was like, throw yourself into this one, or if something was like run away from this one. And when I got to the camp, I started hanging out with them, with the women that call themselves witches, and finding out what they were talking about. And a lot of the time was spent in the healing room. A lot of it was all centered around healing, what the herbs were. And I just, any chance, any 5 minutes I had free, I was in the healing room with Twilight, or I was in the healing room with whoever was there. What's this herb? What's that? What's it look like? They show me the consistency of it, and that's how I learned my herbs. That's how I started learning the herbs. And the healing power of touch. And, but when I really tried to experiment on my own to do this dowsing to find the tunnels, I can't remember who was with me. I'm so bad with women's names, and there were so many women that were always around that, I wish I could remember everybody's names. But there was this one woman and we decided to try to find them, and we made a map, and we I used the dowsing rods, and we mapped out this whole underground system, and it was so kind of overpowering that we actually were able to do it, and that we were able to follow it, that I threw up. I just was so overwhelmed that this was actually possible, and that I threw up. So then when I found out that the land that we quote unquote lost the land, and that the guys wanted to drill for, what is it, natural gas?
We're not sure.
Well, I'm wondering, is that what I doused? Was I dousing a natural gas line? Or was it really the tunnels? Or, what was it that we had stumbled across? What was that? Because, the divining rods, they don't lie. It's about energy. It's about the ley lines, and the apple trees are and the fruit trees seem to be susceptible because they're looking for the water, right? And if you have trenches, or if you have openness, well, if it's underground, proper drainage, you're going to have water in them, right? So that really kind of threw me, and then I realized, whoa, I didn't prepare myself at all. And it just taught me, you don't know shit, and you better, find out what you're doing before you hurt yourself. And it really let me know that, this isn't something to play around with. These are energies of the earth, and these are, time-honored kind of relationships that, you don't go into it like a Ouija board game. This isn't anybody messing around. So then I really started taking it more seriously and trying to figure out, okay, how do I prepare myself to do magic, and how do I shield myself so that I don't get hurt, as the backlash of it. And, from there I just never really stopped. I learned to row. I learned more and more about the herbs. And when I went over to Greenham Common, because after Hunts and Thundercloud and I got out of jail, we were a wreck, pretty much a mess. But women from mostly, I think, New York City, Christina Biaggi and some other women, organized fundraisers to send those of us that have been involved in organizing Seneca over to Greenham Common to meet the women that had been our inspiration. Now, we did have quite a few women come through. I mean, quite a few, maybe 5, 6, 7, 10 women that came through from Greenham Common to us. They were part of it, Becky and Cassie and Fish and I don't even know, Helen, English Helen, we called her. So it was thrilling that these women got together and they raised enough money to send a bunch of us over there to Greenham. And I was like, I'm not going to go. And Christina was like, why not? And I went, yeah, why not? And I wasn't going to go because there was things to do at the camp. I was like, well, we got to winterize, and I started going through the list of what to do at the camp. And she just looked at me like, you're not going to go? And I thought, well, I only have $50 to my name. And I thought, well, I could be broke over here, or I could be broke over there. I'll go. So I left with $50 in my pocket and stayed gone for 2 years. Stayed gone for 2 years. So and Greenham was incredible. You know, the strength of the women, the violence that they had to put up with from the police, not just the police on the outside, but then the Air Force police as well. They were facing the same thing, where the locals were afraid of them. The locals were mad at them. They didn't want them to shut that base. A lot of people worked there. A lot of similar issues. Only they were on common land and didn't have to deal with things like health departments, or they could just concentrate on actions, networking, feeding each other and keeping out of the mud, because it rained a lot. It was constant mud. But that was an incredible experience. So I stayed at Greenham for probably about a month, mostly at Yellowgate, and then went on to there was other actions happening, because the nuclear disarmament movement was huge over there. So we wound up following. We hooked up with some Scottish women. And I think Dolphin, do you remember Dolphin? She went over, and Sky came later, but she also wound up coming over, and I can't even remember. Short-term memory loss. But we wound up, Dolphin and I and some others wound up hooking up with these Scottish women, and we followed them to Windscale, which was renamed from Sellafield. And it was a nuclear power plant on the west coast that was just deadly. It had created such havoc for that territory. Children, cows, sheep, everything had leukemia. And when you drove, when you're driving into the place or hitchhiking as we were or whatever, when you approached it, you just felt everything die. The green wasn't green; it was gray. The grass wasn't green; it was gray. Everything just went, the air, everything. It was like walking into some kind of a vacuum or something. And to have these people deny what was going on when the incidence of child leukemia was undeniably linked to the area, and to have the authorities still, blatantly say, no, this is the way of the future. And the whole point that the coal miners' wives were making when they first initially walked from Wales to Greenham Common was, they wanted to shut down the coal mines and just go to nuclear energy, nuclear power plants. And the coal miners said, there's plenty of coal down here. And the males were willing to sacrifice themselves so that the women and children didn't have to have nuclear power. And they very well did sacrifice themselves, because everybody working in the lungs in the mines finally wind up with black lung disease. But the fathers and the grandfathers and the brothers all knew it, and they said, yeah, we know, but at least our kids get to live for a while, and at least our families are. And somehow they rationalized their own self-sacrifice for their families. And they said, we would much rather do this than have us all die of horrible diseases from the nuclear power plants, because there were a lot of them over there. And then from there we kept traveling north with the women. And they were doing incredible street theater. The theater was just beautiful and moving, and the imagination that went into it, and that it wasn't just a rant, but the emotions that went into it, and the keening. I'd never heard keening before, and I just was like, I'm sticking with these women. And it turned out that they were midwives and witches. So once again, I just gravitated to the women and the witches, and learned everything I could from them. And the little girls were 2 and 4 at the time, and I've just found one of them on Facebook. She's 26, going to nursing school to be a midwife. So I'm just thrilled to get reconnected with them again. And we wound up hooking into this whole alternative lesbian community and straight community in Lauriston Hall. We were up in Dumfriesshire, Cockburghshire. I wound up meeting Laura Flanders and Marie Mulholland over in Belfast, and they were filming with MJ Sullivan. They had their company called Now and Then Productions, and I met them. I went from Stranraer over to Belfast and met them, and They made me carry the boom because I could, so I carried all the sound equipment. And meanwhile, Belfast was under fire. The RUC was running amok, and we were there and caught on film when that little boy at the Sinn Féin, there was a Sinn Féin rally. So we're filming, and the RUC opened fire with rubber bullets. And they talk about rubber bullets being nothing. Well, the rubber bullets are fucking 4 to 5 inches long. The rubber bullets are like a diameter that's, larger than a 50-cent piece. And when they're shot point blank range, they go in and they make a hole like this. They go in, they bounce around off of all the bones and organs, breaking them all. And then they go out wherever they go out and shatter wherever they go out. So these aren't like little kitty bullets, that, they'll just bounce off of you. And that kid was, struck dead, killed right there. And we caught it on film, and that kind of catapulted Laura into international spotlight because she sold her film to the news agencies. And we were there when Marie Mulholland was at her grandmother's funeral. We're in the fucking cemetery, and the army once again comes by and opens fire at the cemetery. So we're all like hitting the ground. Fucking Marie jumps in her own grandmother's grave. Who knew this shit was going on? And they make it out to be the clash between the Irish and the Protestants, and as far as we could tell, it was the Brits that were keeping the shit all going. And then we find out the reason why the Brits are keeping the shit all going is because they made a deal with Reagan. And Reagan said, I'm doing my Star Wars project, and I need to put it in Northern Ireland because of, yada yada, where the stars are and where Northern Ireland is. And he said, you hold Northern Ireland, and I'll give you money. So the deal was made between Great Britain and the United States. They got more aid. They had to hold Northern Ireland. And the way we pieced it all together was because Marie's grandfather calls us from a little village that he lives in on the border between the Republic and Northern Ireland, the 6 northern counties. And he says, Marie, there's lorry after lorry after lorry coming out of here with dirt. He goes, they're emptying the mountain. Sure enough. Fucking drive down there. They're emptying the mountain. That's where they're putting the Star Wars base in. Or whatever they call it. It was like incredible. And to see that, nobody really seemed to have the information. It was like that the whole ruse was supposed to be about, Protestant versus Catholic. And when we got there, the Protestant women and the Catholic women were working together to try to stop the violence because they were sick of it. They were sick of losing their children and their men. And we're walking down the street, and I'm such an idiot. The singing that went on in Ireland, that was incredible. And, I'm meeting this, like, really old lady in a tenement house, and she's teaching me, black is the color of my true love's hair. Her lips are like some roses fair. Goes on, and I didn't know that it was like an Irish Republican nationalist song. I'm just learning a new ditty, walking down the street. My friends are like, I'm walking past soldiers, and I'm like, shut the fuck up, Kim, I'm like, what? Not realizing that it's a dead giveaway that obviously you're a nationalist if you're singing these songs, and what was the other one? Cromwell and his soldiers came. It was I'll get the book out and look at the lyrics again, but it was just a stunning song about how, they are a river turning. We are a river turning, and Cromwell and his soldiers couldn't stop them, and the Romans couldn't stop them, and it was, and here I am, an idiot, humming the new songs I learned at the pub, and it caused the whole lorry full of army men to stop, and they proceeded to all pile out and take their machine guns and run them up my leg, and it was really fucking weird. And I just was like, right, is that the size of your dick then? what else do you say? When they're driving past you slow enough so that the one guy on the edge of the lorry can take his gun and run it along you. And then at night, anytime there was any kind of gatherings, they were just shooting down the alleys blind. We're fucking running through the alleys because, they're opening fire, and you're just fucking running, trying, not to get hit. And there's these tight little alleys, and they're just shooting down the alleys. And people are opening up their back doors and just reaching their hands out into the crowd and pulling people in. Just pulling people into their apartments. So what did the authorities do? They would bulldoze all those old settlements that had those alleys so that they could no longer escape through the alleys. And it was just insidious. But we caught it on film, and the women made a beautiful documentary called What's the Difference Between a House and a Country? And they started talking about domestic violence over there. They started talking about the violence of the army, and it was an incredible piece. And, Laura, and I'm not sure what happened to MJ Sullivan. The last I heard of her, she went over to film in Bosnia. I haven't been able to find her since. So I don't know what's happened with her.
Can you talk about the difference? Did you notice any difference at Seneca about the women from Greenham versus American women? Can you talk about that? What did they bring?
Well, the women from Greenham were just like a breath of fresh air. They came over and it's strange to try to figure out, what the difference was now, because having been over there, you saw that, in a little bitty country like England, I don't even know the numbers of, Estelle, you might know the numbers, but the numbers of U.S. Air Force bases, the number of nuclear power plants, the number of, the U.S. intrusion kind of thing. And it was like being rammed down their throats. And it was like really oppressive and all over the place, and the presence of it. And yet they had this spark that was like, undeniably just this kind of, I don't know exactly what it was, pixie energy, some kind of just, really bright snapple in their eyes, and yet totally discontented with authority. Make no doubt about it. They were in the squatting movement. They were the women that were on the edge, and yet at the same time, not disparaging. I didn't really sense any kind of judgmental stuff happening, and just, well, right, girls, let's just, well, that's a Scottish accent, but, let's just, and their actions were always the most fun. The teddy bear picnic, where they would get onto the air traffic runways, dressed as teddy bears, carrying the little picnic baskets, and then cover themselves in honey when they were about to be dragged off by the army, and just, the most fun, and they made it fun, and it was different, and yet they also brought that whole theatrical, so they could, some of the things that they did at Seneca with the keening and the moaning and the street theater, and, that was very touching. And you could see how it affected the townspeople. And yet, the next day or 2 hours later, they could show up doing some clown piece that also would get the town people just roaring, So they had a very definite way of communicating with the people that you wouldn't think would be on our side. Very anarchic. I think I liked them right away because I hated all the meetings the American women had. And they full well realized that by us buying the land, we bought into a whole pack of trouble and logistics and all kinds of shit that they never had to deal with, because they were on common land. And yes, they had to deal with the violence of their benders being ripped down, and yes, they had to deal with the violence of evictions and being dragged off and all that business. But they still just kept going back and back and back, to the fences. And they didn't have to get distracted in the processes of taking care of the land necessarily. Even though they were, it was Benderville, and they weren't burning wood because there's hardly any wood over there. We're burning peat. I don't know if you've ever sat, around a peat fire, but it's rather smoky. But the spirit was just undeniably, incredible. And it was great, because these were the women that inspired us. So then to actually have them come to Seneca and to see this energy that was so unlike, the staid, go by the rules, this is our process. We have a process. These women were like, process, let's just, what do you want to do? And then to be able to actually be at Greenham was incredible, and to meet these women and to see the force. And they had enough people at Greenham to surround the base. The numbers that they had, they kept up. So that was another, and they had been there how many years by the time I got over there? That was already 3 years into it. So, and they went on for even longer, and just kept at it. And it worked, because we finally did get the Non-Proliferation Act signed. And things did finally, they agreed to, disassemble and to, downgrade and to take things apart. Well, when the summer was over and, people went back to their lives and, whatever they were doing, there wound up being a core group staying at the camp. We didn't want to leave. We wanted to keep the camp going. We lived there. We winterized the house. We tried to winterize the barn. We went to Vermont and bought a school bus, brought that down, converted that, and just tried to stick it out through the winter. But those winters are pretty harsh, and we got bored as shit. There's like only so much you can do around the fire, and then you get bored, and there's only so much miso and rice you can eat, and then you just really want like meat, and then I don't know, it was like we were the rebels within the rebels within the rebels. So we broke the code of no actions happening against, at the back fence. We just started doing, every and any action. And there was also an unspoken rule, because the base was, they had 3 perimeters. They had the outside perimeter that encircled the entire 11,000 acres. Then they had an inner perimeter. And then they had the third region, which was called the Q zone, which was a shoot-to-kill area. And, none of us ever made it to the Q zone, because the shoot-to-kill order, I think, was enough to keep us away from there. But we did make it through the second perimeter. And, we just were bored one evening and decided to go do an action in town. Because at that time, there was a lot of work going on with Central American Solidarity. And, our kids, our military was being sent down to participate in the slaughter of citizens in Central America. It was horrible, horrible human rights abuses, and we knew about it. We were networked into those groups, and it was appalling. It was, and I think, we just got overwhelmed by how vicious the military was and how uncaring, and these were women and children they were slaughtering, and how can we just sit by? And it was, again, the same thing of how can we sit by when this is going on in the name of our government, and yet we don't want it to happen. So we decided to do an action against the Armed Forces Recruiting Center in Geneva, New York, and we wheat pasted posters all over it that said Central America out of the U.S., U.S. out of Central America, and beautiful posters that were done by Mary Fisher from the Spinsters Opposed to Nuclear Genocide. Remember the artwork she did for us? She was an incredible artist. Anyway, and as it turns out, there was a gay man who was drunk staring out his window late that night at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he called the cops. And we tried running, and we weren't able to run far or fast enough. It was supposed to be a get in, get out, But of course, it was right across the street from the cops station. It wasn't exactly like really far removed, across the street and up a little bit. And they said that we superglued the locks shut, but they never proved that we superglued the locks shut. And we admitted to doing the wheat pasting of the posters. But we were like, what kind of damage is that? You get a hose and you squirt it off. It's flour and water. It's no big damage. We didn't spray paint the building or anything. And it turns out that the judge that we went up against, he was particularly embittered about women because his wife had just run away with Margaret, what was her name? Margaret Cruikshank. She was lieutenant governor of New York State at the time. and his wife had just run away with her. So it was like, this big scandal in town. We didn't know about it. We didn't know about it till afterwards. So he sentenced us to the maximum that he could give us for $50 damage. Because he said it cost $50 to replace the lock. And we were like, you never proved that we did that. So for $50 damage, and, we were all up on our high and mighty and pushing the envelope and saying, he said, okay, you can either pay the $50 or you can do community service. And we were like, we were doing community service in the first place. That was our community service, to bring attention to the slaughter of, innocent women and children and men in Central America. I said, that was our community service. Oh, So he sentenced us to the maximum of 3 months in the county jail. And the action took place in December. We were sentenced in January. I think it went like that. So we were in for, a 3-month stay in Onondaga. Was it Onondaga? No. Yeah. Because we stayed in Canandaigua. That's all I remember. So, the county jail, that's a whole nother. Oh. Yeah. Shows up on the internet now.
Yeah.
The New York Times archive paragraph, Johanna Helena Benschop, remember? The Dutch woman. Carol Thundercloud Mackenzie. And, I don't even know if they said Kim Samoa Blacklock. So they AKA'd us too, put all our aliases in there. And I'm like, cool. I don't remember any of that in the original or anything, right? Yeah. We're sentenced to 3 months in jail today for actions from a civil disobedience at, whatever.
Yeah.
So we were charged with criminal mischief, is what the tag was. But we wound up only serving 2 of the 3 months because when we got in there, they had just built themselves a brand new, $12 million wing or whatever it was, $2 million women's wing, and it was supposed to be the state-of-the-art county jail, and they had no programs. Couldn't go outside, couldn't get any books out of the library because, you might steal them. And I was like, where are you going to steal them? Where are you going to go with them? Oh, back to the cell. How ridiculous. So I said to them, look, I'm an English teacher, so let me catalog them for you, so at least the prisoners can read the books. So that took a while to negotiate that. And we were in the women's side, there was 3 of us, and what we noticed was that after every meal, the women just passed out. Breakfast happens, here comes breakfast, women eat, boom, down, passed out. And we're like, what the fuck? And we were doing it too. You're kind of like, oh man, it sounds like... And then we were like, wait a minute. We're being drugged. We don't usually eat food on the outside and then pass out. And then you wake up just in time for the next and then pass out again. So I was like, no. So we declared a 30-day hunger strike. Well, we didn't put a limit on it. We just said, no, we're doing a hunger strike. We stopped eating. The only thing we would do was the little carton of milk that came because it was closed. So we did water and a little carton of milk. And we just stopped eating. We said, no. And sure enough, all the other women are passing out and we're awake. So then we just started writing letters, started doing press releases. At the time, we ratted on the sheriffs because they had this habit of stopping the elevator between floors, beating the shit out of the prisoner, and then going on, so then nobody could see them. And then, but all of a sudden the prisoner is covered in bruises and, oh, he fell. He fell. But what they didn't realize when they built their brand new fancy addition for the women was that they had the same heating ducts that ran from the men's prison, from the men's side to the women's side. So you could hear everything through the heating ducts. So when they're stopping the elevator and beating the shit out of somebody, everybody heard it. But it was how they used, it was their method of crowd control. It was their method of control. Everybody knew that could happen to you. So, being the big mouths that we were and having all the training and all that summer of, mouthing and, singing back to the authorities, because when we were jailed on the base or when we were, handcuffed and taken away on the base, we just nonstop kept singing at them. we didn't shut up once, to the point where you could see the guys are getting kind of crazy with it, that we were constantly at their little brains. And singing wound up the way that we could all do it. Instead of just individuals, shouting at them, if you're all singing in a group, it must have been really trippy for them on the other side. So we started doing it at in jail. Standing right there by the heater duct, singing right into the duct. We know what you're doing, we hear what you're doing, just anything to let them know that they weren't getting away with it. And then they started trying to strip search us. And I don't know if Hans and Thundercloud were strip searched, but they couldn't strip search me because I fought them. And they separated us. We weren't in the same cells. And they wanted to strip search. And I was like, for what? We haven't been out of here. We haven't had any visitors. I got a yogurt stashed up there or something? It's like... So I fought them. I was like, no. So then they threw me into solitaire. And I had... I don't know if I had read The Women of Armagh yet. No, I read that when it came out. But, just to freak him out when I was in solitaire, as coincidence would have it, I got my period. So I just painted the cell with my bloods. Because I knew that they had cameras behind the mirror. Because there was like this little mirror and this little wash basin and this little toilet. No seat on the toilet, no, mat. It was like really stupid. But I was so grateful for the time in solitaire. Because one of the things that they did in the cell block, which I thought was really insidious brainwashing. As soon as they came in the morning, the guards turned the TV on. That TV on stayed until they did lights out at night. That TV was on all day long. Non-fucking stop. And it was just, mind-numbing to constantly have this ridiculousness being, no programs, no counseling, no schooling, just you were awake and you were able to watch the TV. You could play some cards, and that was it. So to have solitaire, I was like, oh, thank God. I don't have the TV running. And I wrote and wrote and wrote and just, got crazier and crazier and smeared my blood all over the cells. And, they didn't want to get anywhere near me. And then one day they came down to get me. And there had been an axe murder in the neighborhood. A friend of mine's grandmother was axe murdered, raped and axe murdered. And they had just brought in the guy who did it. So the fuckers decide that they want to see what happens when they put an Amazon with an axe murderer. And whether it was an axe or a knife, I'm not, he bludgeoned and stabbed her to death. This 84-year-old woman, a friend of mine, Louie's grandmother. And they brought him into the holding tank. They went and got me out of solitaire and put me in the holding tank with him. And it was a glass holding tank, and the processing desk was right across the way from the cell. So everybody pulls up their chairs, sets their chairs up in a row, sits back to watch. What's going to happen? This guy was still covered in blood. He still had the blood on him. And they put me in the holding cell with this fucker? So I just turned Puma. I was like, I saw what was happening. I was like, this is some shit. So I backed myself up into a corner. And I just told the guy, I said, you move a fucking muscle. You move one fucking muscle. I just got as tough and as loud and as roar as I could. I said, you move one fucking muscle. I said, you're going to be chomping on your own dick. And I just stayed in a crouched position so that I could spring if I needed to. Had my back covered. And then yelled at the guys the whole time, while watching this guy. Never took my eyes off. I said, what are you doing? This is your game. This is your sport. You got tired of TV. What? You don't have enough porn to watch? I just harangued them. While staring at this fucker, just harangued these guys nonstop, laughing. They loved it. They're all sitting there with the. Wow. So I wrote about it, sent it out. Wrote about it, sent it out, and by this time we'd already been on a hunger strike for I don't know how long. And then after about 20 days, they started having us do hard labor because they were trying to break us from doing the hunger strike. Had us, scrubbing floors, and I passed out scrubbing steps. And when all was said and done, I think we did 32 days of the hunger strike. And each one of us lost about a third of our body weight from that. And, we stopped it because Hans and Thundercloud had no more weight they could lose. They were really they were starting to get in trouble, their kidneys and their livers. Mm-hmm. Because, then they stopped letting us drink, and, they really started fucking with us. But I think the damage was already done because their reputation was for shit then. And we didn't have to serve the third month because by that point they wanted us the fuck out of their jail, And when they were processing us to leave, the guy was like, "Get the fuck out! You come back here, we're never letting you out." And that was the whole trip of inside, and the whole trip of anybody who's inside is that that they don't have to let you out. Your sentence might say that you have the sentence, but they full well let you know that they can fabricate anything they want. They can keep you there forever. It's all about this, real messed up control shit. And I wrote about the women inside, and, the women I met, a black woman bounced a check for $11 trying to feed her children. She's in fucking jail for writing bad checks. So who's providing for her children then? How does that help her children? Another woman, story after most of the women had been either sexually or physically abused. And, as the statistics now show out, because now they've done some studies, it's alarming. It's like 78% of the women incarcerated are victims of sexual and physical abuse. And, they do what they do as survival tactics. So rather than address that in our society, we just lock them up. So that was a huge eye-opener. And we were released, I guess, March of '84. And then went right down to Katie the Axe Maker of the Queens, where she sat me down with a typewriter and said, "Write it." Because we had been smuggling out the letters, everything that I was writing. I would send them out as letters, and the women at the peace camp were holding on to them. And then when I got out, they gave them all back to me. And Katie was like, "Write it." Sat me down with her typewriter and kept feeding me coffee and cigarettes. Beep, beep, till I typed it all up. So, but that was, and then I just, when you get out, you're a little crazy. And I was like, just give me one reason why not to blow up something. Because, you're just like so angry that they've been able to do this to you. Just give me one reason. And Katie looks at me and goes, you could be in there for life. And I was like, good reason. That's a good reason. That's a good reason. I need to hear more. And then she gave me the book about the women of Armagh. And I started learning about other women in prison. And I started learning about the women of Northern Ireland. And, the tradition that they had of civil disobedience and the violence and the incarcerations. And I found out that the women of Armagh did the same thing I did, painting themselves in their cells with blood. And because it was one way to keep the guards away from you.
Yeah.
It wasn't that you were losing your mind. You were taking your own space and going, "What's the matter? Afraid of a little blood?" And they just thought you were like, gone.
When was the last time you were at the land at Seneca?
Wow. I came back from Europe in, let's see, I was at Greenham 84, I was in Scotland 85, I was in Europe, Amsterdam 86, Brazil 86. So it must have been I must have passed through sometime in 86. Because when I came back to the United States, I stayed with my mother and father and helped my dad because he had gotten in a car wreck or a motorcycle wreck. So I was substitute teaching, and I used to run away to the camp on weekends because it was so hard for me being back. I was in culture shock. I was just, wrecked by coming back somehow. It just, where was the action? What was going on? I was so used to this. Amsterdam was a hubbub again of, squatters and action and then to come back to the United States where things were kind of, business as usual.
What was going on at camp at that point in 86?
Women were struggling to survive. They were struggling because unfortunately there was a meeting that, when was that meeting? Fall of '83, where they decided to remortgage the land and pay back people or groups that had given us seed money to start up. And I vehemently opposed that. I didn't think that we should, the land was paid for. Why would we put the land in jeopardy? Why would we put the whole project in jeopardy? Because, some of the groups wanted their seed money back. Well, $52,000 is not like a whole heck of a lot of money. And yes, we did buy the land with it, but, to then remortgage the land after that horrible press release had gone out saying that we closed, and we all saw what happened when that press release came out that said we closed, and everybody was like, who okayed that? Chris Mangan, I don't know. But we were like, how did that happen? Because as soon as that press release came out saying that we were closing Labor Day, what was it? People were on to the next. The press was on to the next thing. The groups were on to the next thing. So then anytime we wrote and said, no, we're still here. We're, trying to raise money. No, you're closed. No, it was in the paper. We're like, no, it was, but we read it. So that winter, when I came back in '86, and I, was subbing, and I was there quite a bit, I think, in '87 as well, because I was taking care of my grandmother then, living in Syracuse. So that was kind of like my runaway spot, was to get to the camp and just, oh yeah, here you all are. And it really helped me kind of get through those first 2 years back here in the States, because it was hard.
So what about it if there weren't very many women and there weren't a whole lot of actions? What about it provided that respite for you?
That the energy was still there, that this is the place that had begun it all for me, that the women were still there, that they were still resisting, and even though women were getting sick by then because they were already starting to get zapped, we had started finding out about Project ELF and how it had gotten, the same technique of the low frequency waves was being aimed at the women, and they were getting ill, and it was causing discord. Because, one of the things that I think the Army wanted to do was to disrupt us. If they could have us at each other's throats, then we weren't at their throats. So it served as a great tool to keep everybody distracted and sick. And it was very hard. The winters there are horribly hard. It's just like, you said little peace camp on the prairie. Well, you had to hunker in. You had to have your wood. You had to have your food. You had to have a vehicle that could, get in and out of there. And if you didn't, tough ruck, because spring was a long time away, So, but it really was a refuge for me when I came back from Europe. And then I wound up hooking up with, I went to, I think, NUMR, the New England Women's Musical Retreat in 1988 in Connecticut. And again, got that, by that time my job is just to, my job was to drive the van and go pick up the music stars that were coming in, and the women that were flying in. And I'm there at the airport going, welcome to your new home. We're not leaving this time. And that was like my mantra the whole time. Why should we leave? Let's just stay. They'll send the Civil Guard after us. The National Guard will have to come to break us up. But let's just stay anyway. But by then, people wanted to get back to their jobs. But that was my mantra the whole time I was there. Because again, I saw women build a beautiful community. You have the event. You break it. And I'm like, why are you leaving? Didn't you like it here? Wasn't this great? Let's not leave. Okay, we know that we rented the Boy Scout camp. But let's take it over. And it didn't happen. But that's when I re-met Linda Swiat, because I had met her in Amsterdam. And here I am driving the bus, and she's like, Samoa! She's on the bus. Oh, I'm so glad you're doing this. I'm so glad. I'm thrilled. It just so needs to be out there. it's being able to relive it again and to draw all the lessons from it and all the strength again from it, you know, and to remind ourselves,
yeah,
we did this. You know, we rocked the world. You know.